just what the doctor ordered, a mid-engine sports car with a manual transmission. We waited quite some time to talk about the new Lotus Emira because we wanted to get more technical information that wasn't available right away. Now we have it. So in this video, we're gonna have an honest discussion about what it is and what it's become, and we're gonna take it on the track to drive it, but let's get started.
Let's talk about the interior and exterior of the Lotus Emira. Starting with the exterior, it's not something we normally talk about in Savage Geese because it's subjective, but I will say it is one of the best things about this car. It is incredibly striking. It harkens back to the design originally penned on the Lotus Evora, their 2 million pound EV supercar. When you look at this, there's a timeless element to it. It does that unique thing of not looking hyper gimmicky and looking fast when parked. I really do find the front 3/4 view of this vehicle incredibly striking. Despite its good looks, from an interior livability perspective, they've dramatically improved the Emira. This is a big step forward from the Evora GT. Let's start with visibility first. Despite the styling, you have a lot of glass looking forward. It kind of reminds me of an old Honda NSX. Very low dash, lots of visibility. Big greenhouse, great headroom in this car. And despite the mid-engine nature of this vehicle, good visibility at the back. Between the mirrors and the rear glass, you can actually see out of this car. It lends to a good level of confidence. There is still a trunk in the back of this thing. While it is not the biggest by any means, you can fit small luggage items back there. They have deleted the rear seats out of the Evora GT for this Emira, so instead you get a cargo shelf in the back. They have leather in this interior. There is a good feeling, at least initially, of build quality versus the outgoing Lotuses of the past. No longer has that like Walmart, Alibaba, I built this in the shed with my father vibe. This feels like a more mass-produced and substantial car. And there is a moderate attention to livability, like big door pockets. They have decreased the size of the door sill, so it's easier to get in and out of this car. And the head unit, it no longer has a aftermarket looking head unit. You have a screen integrated in the dash. It's relatively low. It's basically what every single other brand is doing with 2 digital displays, but you have Apple CarPlay, it works well. You have physical HVAC controls, a relatively simple to use drive mode toggle, and it puts out its sound output through a KEF audio system. Here's the graph. To my ear, it's nowhere as good as something like a LC500's audio system or even the Bose in the C8, but it is better than the base Bose in like a 718 GTS 4-liter, one of its more natural competitors. Now, pedal box, pedal position, mixed bag. If you have larger feet, it's not necessarily going to be the easiest thing to operate, and they are offset to the right. So you may be sitting straight like this, but your pedals are a little bit offset. However, the shifter placement is excellent. It's less than a hand's length away from the steering wheel, but the shifter itself is typical Lotus. It's a cable operated unit. Yes, you can see the mechanism moving on the side here, but it has this binding feel. It's sometimes hard to put in reverse, and when you're on track, it's not always the easiest thing when you have this thing totally loaded up to put in gear. But other than that, let's head in the shop and put this thing up on the lift. Mark, we're in the shop of the Lotus Emira. We're over a year late to this project. However, the thing we're going to offer our viewers is we got full engineering support from Lotus, and we'll be driving this on track. So from Lotus, huge thanks to Joe, our British PR rep, Corey, our American PR rep, and of course Gavin, an engineer we worked with to explain all of the engineering tidbits that went into this vehicle. Gavin's been working for Lotus since he was a kid. Yeah. And he's managed to see the brand evolve, and of course now he's gotten to see the end of their internal combustion sports cars. The Emira is the end of the line for what you and I traditionally associate with Lotus. They have promised, however, to bring their brand specialness to their EV future. Now, As many of you may know, Mark owned a Lotus. He had an Exige, and he will walk you through his experience owning a Lotus.
Yeah, and just to put this out here right away, you know, you look at this brand and you go to Lotus because you love cars and you love driving, clearly. So the Exige to me was a dream car acquisition at that time. I wanted the rawness of it. And having the ownership experience, and I think most owners will share the same sentiment, it becomes a love-hate thing. You love what they're great at, but you hate some of the chicken problems that you have to deal with, and I was no different. I watched that car disappear in a flatbed truck 3 different times, and the car was gone for 6 months waiting for parts, and you know, it really soured that experience for me, as great as the car was. So I'm going into this project, and that's one of the reasons why I personally wanted to wait. I didn't care about getting the car before anybody else. I just wanted to get the questions answered that you've been spending a lot of time on. So I'm looking at this a lot more objectively. Lotus is a brand that has been building cars for a long time. They're a small company, but I'm curious to see what the improvements have been here, and is it more of the car they're trying to make it be? Not just that niche, laser-focused driver's car, but have they improved it all the way around? So tell me, Jack, since this looks very similar to the Evora underneath, is it the same?
It is not. This is an all-new car. The only thing that's really carryover is one of the drivetrains. The supercharged V6, the same like Edelbrock supercharger 3.5 liter Toyota engine with the same Aisin 6-speed manual is a carryover. And I want this to be a conversation between both of us, because that's the reality part of this. Is I will do my best to walk you through everything technical I know about this car, then ask me questions. So let's talk about body and aerodynamics first. This car is very similar to the Evija. That's what this thing was styled after. The Evija is the not produced yet, claimed to be produced a billion different times, $2 million EV supercar that Lotus is trying to build. It is the same designer, Russell Carr. It's a very beautiful car. It is incredibly striking. You and I both agree that's the best thing about this vehicle.
I mean, I sat there because it's hard for me to get excited for cars sometimes when you're filming and doing the work on the back end. And I was hanging out of the back of the car of our SUV to get the rolling shots of this thing. And I'm like, this is probably one of the best cars I've seen, period, in any modern car. It is striking at every single angle without being, you know, it doesn't look like one angle of the car has been like forgotten about, you know, and that's rare in this price point. When you compare it to something like, I'm not going to throw them under the bus, but when you look at the C8 compared to this, you know, like you're just like, oh God, you know, this car, you never feel that way. And I think there's a huge benefit to having something you look back at, you're like, yes.
Yeah, and the aerodynamics combined with the styling are functional. According to Lotus, one of their core goals for this car is to generate downforce. It's not a lot, they didn't quote me a number, but really what it does do is not generate any lift, which in a sports car is a big deal. So when you're driving down the highway at like 80 miles an hour, you have no rear instability when you have to make a quick lane change on track or your favorite canyon road. You know, you don't have any of that instability, which introduces a lack of confidence from the driver. Right. From a manufacturing perspective, and really the car's philosophy, this has to be that more acceptable Lotus. It has to be a car that they sell a lot of. They're moving their production goal from like 1,200 a year to like 4,500 or 5,500. Global market. They're going to focus on quality. So the factory in Hethel, where this car is built in England, got retooled. They spent like over 100 million British pounds in making this a better factory. Reliability processes have been improved. They've added more robots for things like painting. They've used their parent company's money, Geely, to make this a more acceptable vehicle. I will tell you, yes, this is a first model year car. There are still problems. You go on the forums, people still have problems. It's not drivetrain. It's the window on the driver's side, despite being a production unit, doesn't go all the way up properly. So you have a bad wind seal. We threw a check engine light, which cleared itself. The rear trunk has issues with closing properly.
Or not opening.
Or not opening. Lotus problems. And one of our viewers, we picked this car up at a dealer. That's how Lotus dropped off the car. A viewer of ours who just purchased one of these like 2 weeks ago was already back because his HVAC stopped working, which is, again, first model year car, low production volume, but that's the compromise you continue to make with this brand. It is getting better, at least that's what they're claiming, but again.
And this goes back to the real honest discussion about this. You know, you're fighting in a price category where there is a lot of competition.
Yes, at least here in the US.
Lotus is a brand that is now trying to take what they've been really good at, and now softening every edge to make it more accessible to the normal person who might consider getting rid of their 718 or 911 or a C8 or like even an extreme LC500, something like this. It's in the same price category. And you're not dealing with those problems with those other brands and coming into this.
And you have a dealer network.
And you have dealer networks that is non-existent for this. So they are taking a formula and they are trying to compete in a very difficult space to do that. And it's got to do more than just drive good, and it's got to do more than just be a good GT car. So what's the philosophy behind what they're doing with the Emira versus kind of the previous cars?
The Emira has to be that car that people want to drive every single day. And in many ways, they've done that, right? Because of its suspension architecture and the hydraulically assisted electronic power steering, it feels fun at lower speeds. In the wet, it's playful. It always feels nimble. It's beautiful looking. There's theater to the car. That's the idea behind this vehicle. It is not like the Evora GT was, or the old Exige's, a track-focused machine. A lot of the improvements to this car are, it's just more livable car, and that's what they spent their money on. You can argue that's not very Lotus, right? It's heavier than the outgoing Evora GT by 100 pounds or 150 pounds. It makes less power than the Evora GT. But when you're sitting in traffic, assuming everything's working, it feels special without feeling like a gimmicky hellhole. And that's what this car does well, and that's how they plan on selling these cars. So the aluminum chassis is built at their advanced aluminum works and then shipped to Hethel, and they manufacture this vehicle. And it's shipped all over the world, China, Europe, the United States, probably the Middle East as well. This is a global car now. So the aluminum chassis, which looks very similar to the Evora GT, is all new. Control arms are new, lengths of the control arms are different, the general suspension kinematics are different, subframes are different, brand new car. Similar torsional rigidity, however, the suspension hardpoints, where suspension mounts up, is stiffer than it used to be to deal with the fact that the tire options for this car are wider and stickier than the outgoing Evora. So double wishbone front, links and arms are all aluminum, knuckles are steel, just like in the outgoing Evora. Rear and the back is double wishbone as well. And the suspension setup, they don't want any gimmicks. Their sports car philosophy is simplicity. So no adaptive dampers, monotune Bilstein dampers with, basically you're either picking, do you want sport suspension when you option this car or tour? The Sport has 10% higher spring rates. The damping rate is increased by 50%. So it is stiffer than the Tour. And you get different tires. You go from a more summer Grand Touring tire to a stickier tire. And that, of course, is why they can go up in the spring rates. Brakes, hydraulic brakes, not brake-by-wire. This is Lotus. They know what they're doing. 4-piston AP calipers, 2-piece rotors. Now in the rear, the only car to get a mechanical differential is this V6 manual. You get a Torsen diff. When you go to the 6-speed automatic with the V6, which you should not buy, you get an open diff. And then the 4-cylinder, 2-liter AMG source engine with the 8-speed dual clutch gets an open diff as well. In their open diff cars, the way they simulate a differential is through their ESC, or their stability control module from Bosch. This has the latest Bosch stability control system, and it has a predictive mute setup. So when you put it up in track mode, it allows for some slip. When you have a slip event, it will then recalibrate the stability control for that mute. So it's predicting the level of traction this car has. It's surprisingly good to use.
It's an adaptive system based on the conditions and the driver.
And it's the most advanced gimmicky part about this vehicle.
But I mean, it makes sense, right? They're using, it's a modern car, right?
Yes.
So they're using the modern electronics that they can to make it a little bit better, more accessible to the type of person who's going to buy this as a GT car.
It has a wider track than the outgoing Evora GT. It's like 2.5 inches or 2 inches wider in the front, engine change wider in the back. A lot of that is actually for the wheel placement. So you have actual space under here for your footwells. Now, let's talk about drivetrain. The drivetrain of this vehicle, it's carryover 3.5 liter V6 supercharged engine, Toyota V6, blower from Edelbrock. You have the same 6-speed Aisin, and now only revs to 6,800 RPM, and that's due to the fact emissions. In the past, they could figure out with the emission laws to make this over 400 horsepower and rev to like 7,100 RPM. Those days are gone. 6,800 RPM, it still has the supercharger whine. You still see the throttle actuator move in the rearview mirror. Is there anything else you want me to talk about or questions you have before we head to the track?
No.
All right, let's head to Autobahn Country Club.
Whistler. Just got the Whistler package?
Yeah. No, I'm just a big fan of Blade. You can call me Whistler. I'm Chris Christopherson, dude. Me and Barbara Streisand getting it on. Oh!
Jack, Lotus Emira, we waited years.
Yes, over a year to drive this car. And this is some of the most excited I've been to drive a press car.
You got some, something. Caution, what is it? Debris. Watch out for the debris.
Is the debris in your underwear, Mark, being in this car with me?
Yeah, it is.
First thing to talk about, that Camry V6, dude. This is no TRD edition 3.5. This is pure Hethel edition. Motorsports. Revs to like 6,800 RPM, makes 400 horsepower. It does have a manual gearbox. Is the manual great? Eh.
Like typical Lotus stuff, you cannot rush this car. You cannot rush the gearbox. It's got understeer out of the box. It's really compliant.
Yes.
Let's talk about it, Jack.
Dynamically, when you think of Lotus, you think, I'm going to have a bad time with my spine, and then it's going to be broken. They've allegedly fixed the broken part. We will see. But the bad part with my spine, this is the track pack, as we talked about in the shop. Despite its increased spring rates, it's very compliant. It is incredibly compliant on the road. It's definitely set up to be a street car, to your point. And out here, there's a decent amount of lean, and its default move is to mildly push. But because it doesn't have 5 billion layers of BS, you know when the front end is going to let go, when the rear end's going to let go. It's an easy car to drive because of that. You can nose the front end in with the lean. As I ride the curb. See what I mean? It's really, really easy to drive.
So here's the thing. This is not the hard edge Lotus, okay? This is a car they set up to be even more of a GT than the Evora that we drove previously. Now, it can do track duty, and you have to understand the limits of what this is. You know, you're not going to have the maximum grip, the maximum speed, the maximum directness, but it finds a really good balance between street and track. And you said the key thing. I think they maximized the tire grip that this car can utilize, and because of it, you feel a lot between what the front and the back end is doing. It really communicates to you in terms of where the limits are at all time, and despite it not being razor edge, you always feel like you're connected with the car, despite the softness and despite some of the softer edges on this thing.
Yeah, I don't know what I was expecting, because in the wet, right, when we got this car, despite this being on Cup 2s, it was slushing snow and rain and sub-zero the whole time. And it has this, like, playful edginess, as I was telling you, like, I could drift it through an intersection like no other. Out here, you know, I was expecting the first thing for it to want to do is a huge power slide. It's not that way.
No.
Right, it's a car that you balance on the front and rear. The brakes are good. I mean, all the inputs are good. Everything's placed well. I love the steering wheel, the shifter distance. I guess my question for you, the question for everybody, and I know we're going to answer this later with a direct comparison. If you're cross-shopping a 718 GTS 4-liter and this, both manual, both mid-engined, what are you buying?
Well, this is a far more special car, and we had the argument about in the Evora GT before, right? You're taking the Evora GT because it feels like it's far more unique. The negative part here is, you know, you have to drive the front end more careful because it understeers. You have to be careful with the gearbox because it'll want to grind if you rush it. You know, we got a check engine light out here already. You know, I mean, there's some of the things that the Lotus problems that still exist here years and years after that make me think I'm going to get a GT4. You know, I'm going to get a Porsche over this because I don't have to deal with some of the Lotus stuff that's going on. Is it a really special car? Yes, but I don't know. If you already have a Porsche, you already have some of these other special cars, and you get behind the wheel of this, you're going to love it. But if this is going to be your dream car, to me, I think I would wait for the further iterations of this, assuming they're going to do it, so they can sort out some of this, hopefully.
Yeah, I love it as a street car. I think it's an incredibly special car, and if you're willing to look through some of the compromises, the Lotus stuff, you'll really love this thing, and there is nothing else like it. There is not another mid-engine, double wishbone manual car on the market.
And nothing is good about communicating to you what is going on There's very few of these left, and even though they soften this up compared to like the old Exige and the Lease, this is like 300% softer, but it still has great communication.
No, this makes like a C8 feel like an S-Class.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, for sure, and not in a bad way either.
No, they feel like much different cars. This, with all of its Lotusness, is still a special car. So that, Mark, let's head into the final thoughts, sir. Final thoughts on the Lotus Emira. First off, huge thanks to our Lotus reps for giving us engineering support, Autobahn Country Club for giving us a place to drive this vehicle. It's Autobahn's anniversary. So if you want to learn how to drive, please hit up their driver academy. Really, driving schools are the best investment you can put into yourself, and it's a skill you'll take past your regular vehicle. And if you're looking to actually drive a car on track for the first time, that's probably how I would do it. If you want to do a track day rental or become a member, also go there. And huge thanks to our new title sponsor, Bridgestone Tire. We've used Bridgestones in our comparison tests for years. We've used them on our own personal vehicles. They're a huge advocate for our channel. So if you're looking for new tires for yourself, or you want to support this channel, please hit them up. What about the car? The Lotus Emira is a mixed bag. It is beautiful, and it is a very unique driving experience. There is not another double wishbone, mid-engine manual car that drives anything like this or even exists. The problem is Lotus problems. Small dealer network, not the best reliability. And the Emira now competes with very good cars, and it is sort of a compromised car in its driving philosophy. It's not a pure track car, and it's not a pure GT car. A C8 Corvette costs less money, is faster in a straight line, and is a much better luxury GT. The 718 GTS 4-liter or GT4 are better track cars despite their struts. The engines are more powerful, they're more reliable, and they're edgier and honestly faster around a racetrack. We will be doing a track comparison, so it could be proven wrong, but just seated in my pants, they feel like faster cars. The Emira exists and it sells itself by being special. And because it's that middle of the road car, you have to want a little bit of both, but you want to have the Lotus specialness. And if that's what you're looking for, this is a very compelling car. It's beautiful. It feels special to drive. It's just got some of the Lotus excuses you're gonna have to deal with when you buy this vehicle. And if you can accept that, I promise you, you'll really enjoy this vehicle. But if you want that easy ownership life, you want a GT car, or you want the Porsche edginess, this is not that vehicle. So with that, thanks for watching. Hope to see you soon.